Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Ad Week webinar, a recipe for building a high-performance marketing revenue engine, how UNICEF USA tripled donations, sponsored by Delve. I'm Melissa Ward, Managing Editor of Branded Content at Adweek, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to make sure everyone is familiar with our platform and knows what to expect from our webinar. The actual presentation should go somewhere in the 40-minute range, after which we'll have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for our speakers, just use the side of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, it's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us at today's webinar. About 15 minutes ago, you received a final reminder email from us. In there, you'll find a link to the webinar registration page that you can share with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to join us live, but if they can't, we understand. Today's webinar is being recorded, and they can always catch the on-demand version. In fact, the on-demand recording is available to all registrants. We'll be sending you a link later today when it's live, around 3:30 Eastern. And if you'd like a PDF of today's slide deck, you'll find it in the Event Resources tab at the top of your screen. As always, if you enjoyed today's webinar, definitely check out the full Adweek webinars calendar at adweek.com/webinars. You'll see what we have coming up, and you'll get access to our archive of on-demand content. Now, let me introduce you to our speakers today. We're happy to be joined by Tobes Kelly, VP of Revenue and Product Marketing at Transfix, and former VP of Revenue at UNICEF USA. While with UNICEF, Tobes launched the first wearable for good with UNICEF Kid Power, as well as led revenue, marketing, and operations in the US. We're also joined by Greg Sobiek, CEO and founder of Delve. Previously having held director roles in paid media, Greg founded Delve as a data, media, and ad tech consultancy, serving brands in sectors such as retail, financial services, and nonprofit. We have got some great content to dive into today. So let me bring Tobes and Greg up on screen, and we will get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, Adweek, for helping organize this event. And to welcome everyone to our webinar about a recipe for building a high-performance marketing revenue engine. And Tobes, Melissa already did our introductions. Thank you so much for being with me here today.
I'm glad to be here, Greg.
I hope that we'll have fun, Tobes, and I'm just looking forward to a lively and spirited conversation.
Like we always have.
Super. So let's get into it. For those of you online, obviously Tobes' experience is very much about with the work he's did with UNICEF USA. And we're going to be using UNICEF USA as an example of how a brand can grow its revenues rapidly. Obviously, what Tobes has accomplished and what UNICEF has accomplished in the States is quite amazing. But Tobes, do you feel that this webinar is only for those who are in the non-for-profit industry, or if someone is in financial services and retail, should they stick around, or should they leave this webinar right now?
Look, we're talking about using technology. We're talking about using data and drawing insights from that data, often in real time. We're talking about how we really engineered a predictable revenue engine. I think in many ways we operated like a D2C startup, right? So we built a repeatable, scalable system that allowed us to tap new audiences. It allowed us to target our highest value prospects, improve customer lifetime value. Those are all critical considerations, regardless of industry, in my opinion. So yes, stick around.
Okay, so I hope everyone sticks around. And like you said, you're running UNICEF as a for-profit, direct-to-consumer organization. And later in the presentation, we are going to share 4 specific steps that you took to achieving this revenue growth. And then let's actually look at that slide. So these are your actual results over the last 5 years. What are we looking at? How should one interpret this blue line and these green bars?
So the green is the revenue. The blue line is the ROI. I think what's really important just to flag here is that these numbers reflect the evergreen programs that we had running in market, right? This does not include revenue that came in during any of the emergency fundraising moments that we know certainly happened in 2020 and 2021, right? This doesn't, there's no halo effect in these numbers. So yeah, we basically 3x'd digital revenue over the course of 5 years. But here's what's really interesting, I think, which is we managed to maintain a relatively flat ROI, that blue line. And that's counterintuitive, I think, right? Typically as marketers, we're used to deteriorating media performance when budget increases. Over those 5 years, media costs went up 40%. Right? So what that means is that maintaining the ROI here shows just how effective our go-to-market strategies were over that period. But look, I should also say this, right? The growth in these results isn't just about our ability to manage media well. Right? We accomplished really tremendous things because we had sponsors at the C-suite level who encouraged cross-org collaboration. They saw the need and supported the ask for strong tech and a data foundation. We put learning and development at the sort of core of our digital growth strategies. So, what I mean by that is we hired really good people, and frankly, we just empowered them and let them run. We had fantastic support from our colleagues across the global organization. They wanted to learn with us. They really wanted to come on the journey with us. And frankly, we had a razor sharp focus on ensuring revenue growth.
So thanks, Tobes. And in about 10, 15 minutes, we'll dive very specifically into data, technology, media activation, and people. So the 4 elements that you just shared. But I want to continue to unearth or peel the onion a little bit in terms of the results that you accomplished, and that UNICEF accomplished, because they were quite, I think, impressive. So this next slide, we are seeing share of recurring revenue. And I know that for you personally, you actually have this on your LinkedIn, which is why I also wanted to talk to you about it. But I know that increasing share of recurring revenue is something that you're very proud of. I know that this is something that was important to the strategies that we together developed at, working for UNICEF. Delve as a consultant, right? Of course, you were in the business. And I think it's also very interesting because really any business, it could be a retail business, can be a SaaS business, can be financial services business, all of those businesses, not just NFPs, want to see an increased share of recurring revenue. This really starts to bleed into lifetime value. And how do I acquire my best customers, not just any customer? So can you talk about the role of recurring revenue in terms of your go-to-market strategy at UNICEF? Like, how did this connect with your go-to-market and with the results we saw on the prior slides? And by the way, wonderful dog.
My Visa thanks you. Yeah. Sorry about that. So let me just try and paint a journey here from a sort of user journey, right? You go to unicefusa.org. You can donate one time or you can donate monthly. Every donation is exceptional. We know that the audience cohort, right, within individual giving, that's the most valuable to us is the monthly recurring donor group. Like, they're the people giving unrestricted money every month so that UNICEF can go and deliver its programs wherever UNICEF determine the need is greatest. Like, that's the beauty of unrestricted donations. That's the flexibility you get from the monthly recurring revenue. So our growth strategy, first centered around who is the audience today that we're serving, right? And then understanding where and how to pursue net new donors or customers, right? Aside from upselling our current base, which is, that's low-hanging fruit. Now, we could only deliver step change growth if we began to operate differently. So we decided to target audiences that were already actively engaged in subscription behavior, right? Monthly giving, right? And then we used customer segments, personas, journey maps across the web and across our messaging and different ad mediums to align the digital experience to the end-to-end donor journey, right? Customer journey. It's the same as for-profit and non-profit. And in fact, I think that was the data work that we did with you guys that told us to actually double click into the millennial demographic.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And it looks like, with what I remember, going after millennials specifically was important because the current database was aging a little bit. And from what I remember, right, you felt like, and the organization felt like it was important to change the script a little bit. And we actually did a research together as part of this project that participants can see on their screen. And if you would like to get a copy of this research, just email me or Tobes or go to Delve's website. But what we found is that, and it was very fortunate. It just so happened that millennials, in your case, were very willing to be part of a subscription economy. We wanted them to subscribe in a way to UNICEF as if they were subscribing to any other service, because that's something that they're comfortable with. So in some ways, we kind of got lucky that a target audience that happened to be younger, that we wanted to engage with, that we wanted to pursue, was comfortable with a recurring revenue model. Now, Tobes, when we go to this next slide, and for the audience, we're really kind of tying all the loose ends together on this slide, and we're going to go into very specific examples of how Tobes grew these revenues. So we'll give you a very specific, almost recipe for how you can consider what UNICEF has done and apply it to your business. But this last slide in this little introduction is important. So Tobes, we are seeing that share of recurring revenue on the left is increasing. It's growing faster, by the way, than your total revenue. And on the right-hand side, we're looking at different definitions of return on investment. Again, can you unpack this for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think that was a perfect lead in, right? So first, as you can see, when we looked at our media investments through the lens of not just a one-off donation, but recurring revenue, we saw a huge opportunity. It's far better when we looked at revenue across, 6-month spread. Tactically, just for a moment, when people were giving one time, we were keeping them in our funnel. We were introducing monthly asks. We were showing the value, the impact of subscribing to what we do, how we do it, why we do it. It's powerful stuff. So as the share of recurring donors increased, we could have made an argument that higher investments in media, especially going after millennials, was going to translate into much higher downstream donation revenue. I mean, to be honest with you, I did make that argument. But really, though, to be able to connect both media investments with months 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 donation revenue, that takes a lot of tech and a lot of data integration work. From my experience, most, if not all brands, whether it's a retailer, a travel company, an insurance company, they typically track ROI to that initial transaction. So if a buyer comes back in month 2 or month 3, media buying tools, they don't see that recurring revenue, right? And so that's really why we needed to invest in building the right ad tech infrastructure, right? We had to connect the dots between how were we investing the media, to whom and where, and we had to connect it with the lifetime value of donors, right? LTV, right? Not just on the initial value of those donations.
Yeah, and to add to that point, Tobes, and again, going back to the initial premise of this webinar, which is, both of us believing that this can be applied to any industry. I would imagine for people on this webinar, obviously you don't just have millennials as your target. You probably have multiple micro targets. So imagine defining those targets that are maybe new to brand for you, and imagine tracking their lifetime value segment by segment over time. And then maybe what you will find is that some of these net new targets that you're going after, net new segments, have better lifetime value versus, maybe lower lifetime value. And that will allow you to adjust focus in terms of who are you pursuing as new customers. And Tobes, switching back to this graph, I mean, I have to imagine that being able to look at return on investment, not just in the context of this initial transaction, but including at the top of the ROI calculation, right? Top is revenue, bottom is cost. You're basically making the top heavier, bigger, because you're including revenue not just from 1x, but maybe the first 6 months. Did it allow you to create an argument for different media budgets?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Once we built that data foundation, we could then activate that data, right? And then you can clearly show that for every dollar that we were investing in media spend, we were getting several dollars back.
Sounds good. So let's get into it. So I wanted to share a framework that you and I have discussed, obviously, before this webinar. This is not something that we just came up with on the spot. And based on my experience working with brands, working with Unicef, working with many other brands, there really are 4 main elements to really a marketing program that tries to balance customer obsession with the fact that cookies are going away and this boundary between church and state. Like when I think about the old, what I was used to seeing 20 years ago, you had activation of media management or marketing sitting in one corner of the office, and you had data and technology sitting in the other corner of the office. Right now, really data and technology, and we're going to show this on the next 4 slides, and activation in digital marketing, they're being really connected, but data and technology are enabling much more powerful, much more effective and efficient activation in digital marketing. But you obviously need people to be part of all of those buckets. So Tobes, what's your perspective on these 4 buckets?
I think you teed it up there at the beginning when you said that we've already spoken about the slide and we crafted it, and what that really says to me is like I'm acutely aware of how easy it is, right, to sit here and to rattle off the key elements and make it look really clean and simple on a slide. The reality is that over time we figured what each of these buckets should be, right? We ran down a lot of blind alleys. We faced a lot of opinions along the way. What was critical, though, in that process was the diversity of experiences that we were bringing into the conversations, right? And that's the people. It was so important to have people around us on this journey who wanted to build, right? They wanted to figure stuff out. They just had the curiosity and the hunger to sit in somewhat of a gray area for a while and kind of just keep asking, so what? But where now? Why? It's that, we all collectively grew this insatiable appetite. And it was addictive. Well, I think we say addicting in the US, but you know what I mean.
No, I know what you mean. And I also want to clarify that I'm very much a geek, okay? I love technology, right? I love data. And I really like how digital marketing is very unforgiving. If you're succeeding when you're managing a budget, or if that you're failing because the ROI isn't there. But I want to be very clear, and I hope you will agree with me, that these 4 buckets that we both feel so passionate about, and we're going to talk about just them on the next 4 slides, it really isn't about those buckets. They really are a mean to an end. And the end is creating a lasting competitive advantage. And I'm so happy that we're able to have this conversation today, because sometimes when I talk to brands, data technology activation feels a little theoretical. And really, Unicef is a great example of the fact that you've grown so much faster than the industry. And the ROI, like you said earlier, media costs were going up. It was flat, which really means it was going up when you really think about the mathematics of it. So, I'm just really happy that we're having this conversation, because these 4 buckets, this is such a great example that this is actually coming to life when it's properly executed. Now, So that's really more of my kind of personal, having done this for 20 years perspective, that this is really about results. It's not about data tech or activation. It's about driving measurable results. Now, to get those measurable results, and I'm switching the gears a bit on you, but I think this is important. What's the connection between asking questions and being a marketing leader? Because I sometimes feel that the industry, that I myself get wrapped up in the details of data and tech, and it's really about there's something deeper going on here. So asking questions and being a marketing leader in this process, why is that important?
It's asking questions, and it's also about having the courage, having the honesty to admit that you don't have an answer. And quite frankly, I don't know if it's about asking the right answer. I think there's a process of refinement to getting to those. It's not about having the right questions necessarily, but it is through that process of listening and learning and digging a bit deeper. You start to land somewhere, but putting a process in place to get those answers is really critical, right? And then robustly supporting others to do the same, right? To provide the air cover. It's like a forcing function, right? The impact is so empowering. I honestly, I think that's leadership. And at the very beginning of this journey, quite personally, like I was fortunate enough to have a manager who gave me that, right? It's knowing where you want to go and setting that direction. I don't actually think it's about knowing how. You figure the how out, right? That's the fun part where the data starts to come into play. And maybe to that point, Greg, I hear the phrase data-driven marketing so much, and I don't know whether it's sort of overused or misused, but for me, simply put, it's about asking questions, and then it's using first-party data to answer those questions.
Thank you, Tobes. And when we're sharing this perspective, audience, because if there was one thing, and I'm obviously preempting a little bit, fast forward to the end, but we're going to go into the 4 steps that Tobes took and Unicef took to deliver these results that you saw earlier, to tripling their revenue. And I think if there was one thing that we would want you to pay attention to on these slides and go away with and implement tomorrow in your roles, is when you think about data-driven marketing, really recognize and surrender to the fact that it's on you to ask good questions. And then it's on the data to provide you the answers to those questions. And like you said, Tobes, thank you. If that's data-driven marketing, I think that's something that we can embrace. It's actionable. But again, it's on us as marketing leaders to define the questions. We don't need to worry about what the answers are or how to get to the answers. That's why we are in a leadership position. We have a team that, if they're capable, they should be able to help us get there. So Tobes, we're looking at this first slide. We have this 1 of 4, right? There'll be 3 more. Again, this was the first step that you took to tripling UNICEF's revenue over the last 5 years, and it wasn't asking about more budget. So what are we seeing on this slide, and why was this your first step?
Yeah, it's funny. Sorry, it looks a bit like Hangman. That wasn't really the intention. It's a sort of typical marketing funnel, right? It mirrors a typical customer journey, right, in a fairly simplified way. So what happens before a website visit, like, what ads are people seeing, where, with what messaging, then you sort of see what happens on the website, between when they land on it and hopefully convert, or they abandon the site. And then after they convert, they become a customer in the website, or database, whatever that might be for you guys. What happens? Or if they abandon, do we then kick in the retargeting?
So what is that first step? I'm seeing this green arrow. What does this arrow represent? So
a little bit of background is when I took on the digital revenue function, we needed to understand how can we extract more value from the current marketing budget. I think the obvious place to focus there is the conversion rate, right? So that's, I could have put any shape there, but the green arrow is just, to me, shouts conversion rate. So for us, that was the moment that people landed on a landing page and when they donated.
Understood. And I imagine that this arrow represents the need to widen the funnel in the process. Now, why do that? That seems complicated. Why not just ask for more budget? That seems in some way easier.
Fair, and that was definitely my first question. And it certainly got rebuffed pretty swiftly. And in fairness, I didn't have any.
So you asked for more budget, and you were actually rebuffed.
I always ask for budget, and yes, and it's quite funny. And being on this process, I think people have learned to say no to others as well, because the bottom line is you need to come with the data to support the ask, right? So we were forced in many ways to run a lot of experiments on our landing pages, right? And we learned pretty quickly where we needed to optimize, right? How many form fields did we need for that sort of optimal conversion rate, the positioning of the ask, the wording of the call to action. Sometimes source media mattered for certain cohorts, how many words were required on the landing page. There's a whole bunch of optimizations that we made. But we didn't change the amount that we were spending in media, right? We were learning how to create that optimal experience. And in so doing, we increased our conversions, and we got a boatload of data and audience insights from this, right? So, what causes certain personas or cohorts cared about, and what we showed was that with the same budget, but armed with the insights that we were drawing out of this data, we could drive incremental revenue growth. And we could also give the prospect a far more meaningful, relevant experience with us.
And maybe for those who are not that familiar with UNICEF USA, UNICEF has many causes, clean water, right, climate change, and just
education,
to kind of bring this to life. And we don't have time today to share examples of landing pages, but if the audience goes to unicef.usa.org, you will see that the landing pages are actually customized per cause. And just to bring this to life, Tobes, aligning really causes and really surrendering to the fact that different causes demand a different personalized experience was that ultimately at the heart of this funnel being extended.
Yes. Look, what it did was it helped us plan, it helped us design, it helped us execute significant event triggers throughout the customer buying journey. I said it before, and I'll say it again, it's exactly the same as in a for-profit business, right? And I wanted to do, or sort of put into play or accelerate real-time targeted personalization. And that directly linked itself to more revenue. But you worked on this project, or the Delve team did, right?
Yeah. Makes sense. Now, just in terms of how this was accomplished, Google Analytics 360 played a role. So we want to go to the 4 steps always, right? So in terms of technology, UNICEF used GA360. I'm just sharing this just for the audience to be able to kind of internalize this and action on it if you choose to do so. Then UNICEF was able to actually group those audiences into people who are into climate change versus clean water. Then when new landing pages were launched, they could see changes at cause level in conversion rates. That's really activation. And this was a team of web analysts, UX designers, development team, and Tobes. I mean, the writing is on the wall. In terms of impact, what happened? Some conversion rates went up.
Conversion rates went up, most certainly. ROI increased. The bottom line was we were driving more cash.
Yes.
Frankly, at extraordinary levels because of this connectivity.
Thank you, Tobes. So let's move to our second step in this process. So again, by this point, UNICEF has widened its conversion funnel. That's why that triangle is now marked in light green. That's done, check. And really, I think that you had a bunch of hypotheses that you wanted to validate with the data. And I guess there was you chose the next step in terms of optimizing this funnel. What was the next step? And what did you want to validate in terms of those hypotheses?
Yeah, so to extend your example, what we needed to confirm first was that if I showed someone an ad about clean water and I took them to a landing page which was focused on clean water, that they actually converted at a higher rate. That sounds very obvious, but we've run so many tests and have been deeply surprised by the results that we learned pretty quickly to leave our assumptions at the door, right? And then I wanted to see which version of creative about clean water delivered the highest click-through rate. We had lots of versions, lots of ideas. And then finally, I wanted to make sure that we were adopting an always-on testing approach around creative. Right? I guess to some degree, it's that classic stop, start, continue framework, right? It's just that this framework also was jam-packed full of questions, right? Stop, what's not working, crack on with the new ideas and what to go and test, and then continue what was working, because that's where your scale is really going to start to kick in.
And Thompson, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that a question of if someone goes to a page about clean water and I show them a retargeting ad that's about clean water, am I in fact getting a lift in click-through rates versus just showing them a generic ad? I feel that sometimes as marketers, it's hard to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, I want to validate this. It's a question that I want to be certain about. It's something that I can share with my executive team to show that I have a methodology. And this goes back to me, I'm raising this point because this goes back to asking questions. And sometimes maybe those are very obvious questions, and we assume that the answer is very intuitive. But sometimes it's just good to restate what's obvious, and maybe sometimes what's intuitive isn't what data is going to prove.
I would just add this, and I completely agree with you. Through this testing methodology that we sort of really developed and honed our approach through and with, like, we discovered that we had to lead with experimentation, right, over any elaborate planning, right? We had to go data first, right, over any of the intuition that we would naturally have. And then to the creative point, right, we chose a very iterative design process, right? I think I think it's natural that people look to a sort of more traditional, big development upfront kind of thinking, which it just doesn't give you that agility. I think in some ways it just breeds a sort of layer of comfort where people can sort of just cling on to presumptions. And so we really just had to focus on what mattered. And really what matters is what's moving the needle today, in which cohort, for what reason. And then you just focus kind of relentlessly on, that which can be measured.
Well, in an interesting way, maybe making a significant business impact and being a transformative marketing leader is about changing what the organization is used to. Like you said, changing the decision-making process from intuition to, again, just asking questions and using data to answer those questions. And I would like to believe that over time, that leads to better outcomes, that leads to actual growth. Now, again, in terms of impact, right? So the landing page is optimized. Your creative, in this case, for the sake of this example, in retargeting is optimized. What was the impact of that process?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it is more unrestricted revenue, right? The click-through rates were increasing, the costs were decreasing, therefore the ROI was increasing as a result. And I should say, like, through this process, we brought on a donation platform that really took the optimization to a completely new level and really delivered for us, right? It really, opened up the aperture for us to drive more impact as Unicef, as the organization.
Understood. Thank you. And again, for the audience, how did Unicef do it? again, 4 key ingredients in terms of technology. They were using Studio from Display and Video 360 to develop data-driven creative. This was actually technology which they could in-house, and it was technically quite inexpensive, so that was really good in terms of ROI. They were able to activate those creative assets, in this case, in Display and Video 360, but could be any DSP platform. So then this data, connection of data between GA360 and media buying platforms and dynamic creative optimization allowed them to use this data to launch personalized creative at scale and to activate creative in media buying platforms. And people, it was a combination of media buying teams, of creative developers and creative designers. So it wasn't just designers, it was also individuals who knew how to develop, from a coding perspective, data-driven creative at scale. So UNICEF was able to have hundreds of different versions of creative. And again, we don't have time today to show this to you, but if you're interested, we can share those examples afterwards. Reach out to me or to Tobes. But they were able to launch hundreds of versions of creative at scale at very minimum cost. Now, so moving on, Tobes. So our third step. So again, as a reminder to the audience, by now, the funnel is wider. And obviously, this took months, right? This was not something that happened overnight, but funnels wider, different landing pages that convert better, creative that's aligned with those landing pages. I assume you are ready, Tobes, to ask for higher media investments at this point.
So yes and no. Yes, in the sense that there was a degree of frustration, right? You saw the opportunity. We're doing a lot of testing now at this stage. You see very quickly that it's about the velocity of testing that starts to make all the difference, right? It's the scaling of the tests, the amount of learning that you're doing is just kind of feeding this loop. So you need the investment there in many ways, just to drive more traffic to the website so you can get to statistical significance like quickly enough to continue. But we also needed a better marketing database, right? A marketing data lake. And so, yes, driving recurring revenue was critical to the growth strategy. At this stage, we didn't have the data to know which campaigns or which channels were driving those recurring customers to the brand, right? So if this really was building for the long term, then the investment had to go into that marketing database.
So it almost feels like, if I go back to this slide, which we showed earlier, that because there was a commitment at your level, at management level, to not only driving donations, but recurring donations, that really forced you, if I may say so, or you had to be congruent with that strategy and actually holding the horses in terms of new media investments and really going deeper into data and technology investments. In this case, a data lake was something that was simply a part of your strategy. It had to get done.
Yep, it absolutely did, right? And you can connect that to media allocation, right? Just by being able to calculate long-term value at that campaign channel level was seriously valuable. Like having that first-party data around LTV, that was a key insight into managing the paid media. Right? It meant, just to break it down, it meant that we were placing our dollars in the right channels to engage the right audiences.
Understood. So this is truly an example, I mean, to me, of doing more with the same, right? Invest those dollars into data and technology versus media. And again, for the audience, how was this done? Technology in this case was Salesforce for the backend, because that natively integrates with Google Marketing Platform. So UNICEF made a very conscious choice to make it easy on themselves, which I think was the right thing to do personally, because why spend time on data integration if those technologies natively integrate, and Salesforce natively integrates with the stack that UNICEF already had? Then it was easy to connect data between the backend and the front end. It kind of flowed seamlessly. Media buying tools could basically see that a click was predicted to have high lifetime value because of data that existed in the backend. So then these insights from the back end, in terms of who's high value, low value, could be activated in media buying. And team was really all team members, right? This was a very, very multidisciplinary team. And Tobes, results before we move on, what numbers, what metrics did this move hopefully up?
Yeah, so now we're really sort of looking at, are we attracting, retaining the monthly recurring revenue donors, right? And the answer was an incredible yes. And were we managing to maintain it at that high ROI? And the answer to that is yes, for all the reasons that you've shared. But it really allowed us, right, with that marketing, data lake, to get a fundamental understanding of our audience. It's at that point that you can then start to build that kind of predictability around revenue.
Understood. And let's go to our next slide, which I think nicely brings it all together. So again, by this point, it feels like your funnel was optimized. It's wider, creative is working harder. You're able to optimize to high value customers, to recurring donors. I really hope, Tobes, that by this point, you truly were ready, right, to ask for more budget, yes or no?
Yes, at minute 44, I'm sure people are relieved to hear that we did then ask for budget. But the bottom line there is...
drink that,
but, we were able to prove that we could extract more value from each media dollar that we were putting into market, right? We were able to deliver better customer experiences, which we could measure the impact of, right? That's what then really fuels a scalable revenue.
And how did you go about investing those additional media dollars?
Well, look, we measured everything, and maybe sometimes too much. I think there's a balance, and I think at the beginning I necessarily didn't get that balance right. I think that there are probably examples where we squashed creativity, but I think we learned from that, and we tried exceptionally hard to encourage a good mix of big and brave creativity, just backed by solid data validation that guided execution. And so linked to that, I had 3 questions, and I was pretty driven to finding the answers to them. And the first one was around, and it's absolutely foundational. If I'm structuring campaigns that are supposed to target net new donors, like people who haven't donated before, how do I know that's actually happening?
Well, and if I may, right, I can actually provide that perspective. What I remember is that we were able to look at every new donor and simply see if that person did or did not exist in the database. And then we were able to give you a report, from what I remember, that, for example, would show us rows, campaigns by channel, and as a column, share of net new to file, which I really appreciate that we were able to do this together, because it's not something that one does always, but that provided lots of clarity in terms of, are we truly driving net new to the file, or do we just think that that's something that we're doing? Now, moving to the next step, because I see we have a second question here. Intent data, right? What was the role of intent data in this whole process, since you were changing your media mix and you were changing your marketing investments?
Yeah, let me try and give you an example. So third-party cookies going away just makes intent data that bit more important, right? It helps a lot in terms of finding high-value customers, high-value donors, right, in this case. From an example perspective, you've got Google's custom audiences and display video 360, where you'll have examples of audiences that search on Google, best way to help combat climate change. So we capture that data we can then show those people not just ads on google.com, but also display or video ads outside of Google. And that's where some of the sort of special source and intent data kind of grounds itself.
Understood. And finally, and this is probably will be my last question, what was the role of additional media dollars? I know that you wanted to expand your media. What was the role of branded media specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I think branding sometimes it's for performance marketer, if I may, that's a tough pill to swallow to actually do branding.
It is, but I think it's really about connecting top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, understanding the role of both. I knew that in order to reach new audiences, we were going to have to put media dollars behind brand efforts. But the challenge is what's the right way to do that? I didn't want to be burning dollars on impressions, right? Those dollars needed to drive revenue at the right ROI. And I needed that measurement, right? That connectivity between all of our efforts. In many ways, this was an internal alignment journey, right, as much as anything. So, when we started, I think the experiences certainly being served up to the end user were uncoordinated. I think the efforts across channels and across brand and performance were fragmented. And we had to have some pretty hard conversations. And thank goodness we had the data that we did, because actually having that data allowed all of us to build experiences that weren't just coordinated and integrated, but they were actually able to be adaptive to changing prospect and donor needs. And so, just to round that out, it was you guys at Delve that enabled me to measure the whole conversion funnel, right? We were able to quantify the efficiency gains, right? That's what really highlighted the connectivity of our full funnel approach, and drove that revenue growth.
And thank you. And that was my last question, just in closing, before we move to Q&A. Again, if I stay true to what you and I promised the audience at the very beginning, we are both advocating that the start of this journey is about thinking about your brand's strategy. There's probably a marketing plan, right? There is a vision that the board, the CEO, you as a marketing leader together have agreed on. And there are probably a bunch of questions that you need to find answers to deliver on those plans. I think what we're advocating with Tobes is that you start by asking those questions, writing them down, thinking about what's the right priority, and then making a commitment to use data to answer those questions. Is that data-driven marketing? I think so. Tobes?
100%.
Thank you. So let's move to the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Tobes and Greg. So as mentioned, we do have time to take a few questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can over the next 5 to 10 minutes. If we don't get to your question, we always make sure they get forwarded over to our sponsor so they have the opportunity to possibly reply offline. But first, a couple quick reminders. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll be emailing everyone a link to that recording. And if you want a copy of today's slides, you'll find a PDF in the event resources area at the top of your screen. So let us dive into these questions. So the first question I have, I'm going to pitch to Greg first. What's most important to consider when thinking about ad tech and Martech selection?
Sure. So maybe I can first chime in, Tobes. That's okay with you. I mean, from my perspective, integration. I think it's important to think about how data is served. So if I think about journey, right? What are my customers seeing before the website, on the website, after? Sometimes as marketers, we think about these systems separately because our teams are structured separately. There's an analytics tool, there's the data science tool, team. There's data science team, analytics team, media buying team, website team. And we sometimes forget to think about how data flows through those Martech and AdTech solutions, and how I can connect the dots. And connecting of the dots between the different signals is really about having an integrated first-party data strategy. So I always lean, like with Unicef, on having tools that natively integrate, because then it's easier to unify them. Tobes, I don't know if you have any perspectives.
So we went through a digital Martech transformation at Unicef in the US, right? And it was across fundraising, marketing, brand performance, digital operations. And the real sort of big shift that we went through was from being masters of brand and advertising to being masters of data and the strategy and the ROI. And that's a real kind of, if you like, it's a lifestyle shift internally. And then the other part that I guess learned through onboarding, offboarding tools, technologies, was around talking measurement and incrementality and ROI, right? So in the beginning for us, simply getting more access to data and better and different data allowed us to do different things than we'd done before, right? So those are quick wins, and those are really important to shout from the rooftops. And then we would measure like everything that we did from an incremental point of view. I think that's really critical, because then you can go back, if you like, to the steering committee and say, hey, like our ROI on this program is this. Our return on investment that you gave us is Y. You know, when you compare it to the general rate of return, it's you know, XYZ much better. So maybe that's a helpful perspective as well.
Great. So my next question is, how does one connect data from media buying platforms and the website with the backend CRM system, you know, especially in context of lifetime value? Greg, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, for sure. So this is where my inner geek, you know, can come through, can shine through. But it's really about identifying a unique customer ID at the time when someone is transacting, and then connecting that with your backend system. So in this case, Salesforce. So what Unicef was able to do is they used Google Analytics 360 and Salesforce, and those two solutions natively integrate, because there's an agreement between Salesforce and Google to do that. So all that means is that Google Analytics could see data from Salesforce, and then it could send it upstream to media buying platforms. I know this gets a little geeky. Again, I like that stuff. But what was really elegant here is that it was not a very difficult integration to do, because that connection was already natively provided by Google and Salesforce. You can do this with other tools as well. It just requires a little bit more of customization to the setup.
Got it. Great. All right. What are some tangible examples of business value that is generated by first-party data projects?
Tobes, if you want, I can start, or?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, really, I'll stick with the premise of this webinar. The main value of first-party data is the ability to answer questions. So, you know, we can talk about, I can share a bunch of actual tangible examples, but to me, philosophically, the major benefit is that if you are collecting the right data, then you are armed with the ammunition to answer questions that are most important to you. The ability to, and there are a variety of questions, a variety of answers, but the ability to just have the confidence that I can answer those questions with data, I think often makes all the difference.
Tobes, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I'd say amen to that. Yeah, no, I'm wary of time too, so I'm going to stay stum.
Well, Tobes, thank you for bringing up time, because you are correct. This is all the time we have for Q&A. I want to thank both of you so very much for this presentation, as well as our sponsor, Delve. Some final reminders: make sure you download the slides from Event Resources and check your email for a link to the on-demand recording. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, please check out the Adweek webinar calendar at adweek.com/webinars. Again, thank you, Greg and Tobes. Also, thank you to our audience for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.